Welcome back to the class. Now we're going to be talking about the economic policies that were implemented during the economic crisis, so between 2008 and 2014, 2015, so to say. Actually, 2008, in Spain, there were elections. José Zapatero, the person you see in the image, won the elections for his second term. And at that time, during the elections, the crisis was still not part of the campaign. It was not in the public agenda. It was not that clear that we were driving to where we were. And actually, it was only 100 days after taking office that Zapatero had to implement the first austerity plan. However, this was a very modest austerity plan, 250 million saving of the budget. That was, believe me, almost nothing for what it was about to come. When the crisis properly hit, and this was 2009, it was very clear. I mean, summits internationally, G20 meeting, the European Union trying to decide what to do. The first trend in the crisis was to activate the economy through public expenditure. This is very much John Maynard Keynes, and that is what was done during the Great Depression. And actually, this is what the Obama administration did in the United States, and actually worked pretty well. I mean, worked better than what we did later in Europe. But the first idea was to implement this kind of a stimulus plan, and the one we put in place in Spain was called Plan E. 2.3% of the GDP, so actually was a large financial commitment, 25 billion euros. And the way to use it was actually through construction works. It could be roads, and actually through municipalities and through other territorial organizations. So you can build new roads, school, anything that will dynamize the private sector through public expenditure. So actually, these principles were very clear. Zapatero, saw that the unemployment figures, as we saw in the previous graph, were, out of control, completely out of control. And he implemented a labor market reform in 2010 to try to stop this. This labor market reform included a suspension of collective agreements. By the end of the day, these are agreements between trade unions and business organizations, and what they try to grant more labor rights to workers in certain sectors. So these collective agreements could be suspended if they were unable to renew it. Also, the implementation of short-time working, and this is very interesting. This worked really well in Germany. Actually, tomorrow I'm going to comment about short-time working and actually how committed now countries are to these short-time working schemes. And by the end of the day, is reducing the working hours of an employer. Also, correlated to that, you reduce the salary, but that part of the salary that he's not earning anymore is being paid by the state. So this was implemented here as well. However, in Spain, it was not that widely used. And then, more importantly, in this labor market reform, dismissal for companies facing losses. So if a company was facing losses for 3 trimesters, they could actually dismiss employers for, by the end of the day, paying a lower amount of money to that employee that was being dismissed. And also, dismissals for absences was introduced to ease. By the end of the day, it was a way of easing dismissal to make dismissals easier for companies and not that expensive, so they can readjust the working force of the company so they could survive to the economic crisis. Before Zapatero called for snap elections in 2011, he implemented a more severe austerity program. Here, remember, we were talking about 250 million. Now we're talking about 15 billion euros, and here we're. In this case, it was obviously a large pack affecting various sectors, but the most shocking, interesting, well, not the most interesting, but one of the ones that made the headlines was actually cutting public employees' salaries by 5%. So actually, that was a substantial reduction of cost of expenditure from the side of the state. In 2011, Mariano Rajoy is elected president. We are moving from a left-wing government with Zapatero to a right-wing absolute majority government with Mariano Rajoy. And Mariano Rajoy, he gets to office with 22.8% unemployment, so unemployment out of control. And so you can imagine the first decision he has to make is another labor market reform to try to tackle this problem. And he includes cheaper dismissals. So by the end of the day, when an employer dismisses an employee, has to pay a compensation based on the time he's been working for that company. So this amount was reduced with this labor market reform. Also, is economic dismissal. It was not necessary anymore that the company proved it was actually losing money. It was actually only reducing the income, the amount of money they were making. New contract types to try to dynamize the economy. So these were training contracts. So obviously these workers are less protected, and it's understood that they're in a training period. And last, also, well, trying to tackle this temporary contract problem that Spain has always had. However, to try to prevent the dismissal of these temporary workers, because by the end of the day, after 2 years of connecting temporary contracts in Spain, you actually become automatically a fixed company employee of that company. So by the end of the day, what happened here was that rule got it was an exemption to that rule. Also, Rajoy implemented much more austerity. Here, it's hard to calculate how much money these plans were. Here, the budget, he had an absolute majority, so he could easily cut the budget as much as he wanted. But also, here the issue was that comunidades autónomas, self-governing communities, were needed for bailouts. Actually, the finances of these comunidades autónomas were kind of bankrupt. The level of debt was too high, and the central state had to inject money into the comunidades autónomas. However, in return, they started controlling the finances of the self-governing communities. And the other bailout that was needed in Spain was the banking sector bailout. And this is a story that it's unbelievable in a sense. Obviously, this bailout was actually financed with European Union money. And here you can see a list of the different banks that got bailout. This is the amount of money that each bank needed in millions. And this is the amount of money that it was never recovered by the state from that bank. And this is this is the story of the crisis, and how we had to, how the state had to put 54 billion euros into the banking sector, and 42 out of these 54 were never recovered. That money was just spent on the banks. The state, this was actually a loan, but it was never recovered, that money, and it's never going to be recovered. And then this is a problem. By the end of the day, we said before that the banks were exposed to this toxic debt. So what Spain did was creating this toxic bank, so to say. So all the toxic assets will move to this bank, restructure them, and try to sell them in the market, even though the state knew it was losing money by doing so. But at least it was a way to dynamize the economy once again. So you can see, how much money the economic crisis cost the Spanish people, at least in the banking sector. Last but not least, we can see, actually this is going to take us to the next class. This is how from 2014 GDP starts growing, and 2015 we can say that Spain is left the economic crisis behind. However, we have 5 years in between 2015 and 2020, that is what we are now, and that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. In a comparative perspective, you can see that what I was telling you about before, how Spain and Italy had an aftershock of the crisis and actually came out of it later, how Italy actually never really recovered from it, and we are now actually hit by coronavirus, and the crisis is going to be hit equally different countries, but obviously for us being exposed to tourism, we'll discuss it on tomorrow, but obviously we are in a dangerous position for sure. We are in a risky position for our economy. I hope you enjoyed today's class. Actually, you know that this week was Feria. We shouldn't be here. We should be at Feria de Abril enjoying the flamenco and the rebujito. But well, I'm sure you will have other chances to come to Sevilla and enjoy this beautiful time of the year. So I hope you're all safe and sound. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a nice day. Bye.